morning. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to my house this morning. And I'm sorry I wasn't here for your very first meeting, but welcome to the second meeting of the FOIA Advisory Committee. The momentum behind government openness and transparency is growing around the globe, and it's an exciting time to be a part of the international conversation. And efforts like the Open Government Partnership have provided a platform for leaders from around the world to share ideas and declare commitments to transparency and accountability. And at the United Nations last month, President Obama spoke about the importance of the open government movement, and he made reference to the work of this committee, citing efforts to modernize FOIA so that it's easier for American citizens to use FOIA. As the nation's record keeper, NARA is grateful to the President for acknowledging the importance of FOIA as a cornerstone of democracy, and for acknowledging the work of the committee, as well as the work of our colleagues at the Justice Department and elsewhere, as we take a look at the original open government law. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge OGIS Director Miriam Nisbet on this, the last occasion which she will be chairing the FOIA Advisory Committee as she retires from federal service at the end of November. Miriam joined the Justice Department a few years after FOIA was passed and has spent her career working toward government openness through positions inside and outside of government. We and all Americans owe Miriam a debt of gratitude for the work she has done in just 5 short years. You will be missed, and rest assured that the work that you have done sets the framework for American citizens to be reaping the benefits of your work for many years to come. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you.
Have a good meeting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The archivist was not able to be with us in June at our inaugural meeting because he was testifying in Congress and thought it prudent to accept the invitation of the House Committee on Oversight, Government, and Reform, but we're delighted to have him here today. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. We really are so glad to have everyone with us today. Before I get too much further, I do want to be sure we're going to go through introductions, we're going to go over the agenda, but we do have 2 of our committee members on the telephone, and I want to just check and see if we have them. Can they hear us, and can we hear them?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, so good morning, Dave and Clay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so we'll do introductions in just a moment. Gentlemen, if you'll stick with us for a moment. I appreciate everybody being here, and particularly the work that the committee has already been doing through 3 subcommittees to dig into 3 priority areas that we identified at our meeting in June. I know everyone joins me in thanking the Archives for being the host agency for the committee, and it is, as you know, a very appropriate place for us to be sitting, considering the mission of the Archives, to provide access to government information and to preserve our nation's records, which are the backbone of good government and certainly the Freedom of Information Act. I rejoined the National Archives 5 years ago. I'd been here in the 1990s to launch the Office of Government Information Services. As David said, the office envisioned by Congress to serve as the federal FOIA ombudsman, providing mediation services for the first time to resolve FOIA disputes, and reviewing FOIA policies, procedures, and compliance across the government. Like this committee, OGIS is also charged with making recommendations to improve FOIA administration. Many of you in this room have been an invaluable part of our team's achievements over these past 5 years, and I want to thank you for that. I know that the Archives is hard at work on finding a successor for the director position, and I look forward to working with that person to keep the momentum going. Now, I'd like to move into introductions of our members around the table and also on the telephone. Just a couple of notes from our last meeting. Michelle Meeks is no longer a part of the committee because she changed positions within her agency. And as a replacement, the archivist has appointed Brent Evett, who is the Deputy General Counsel for Mission Services, Science and Technology with the Defense Intelligence Agency, its Office of General Counsel. Welcome, Brent. Glad to have you.
Appreciate it.
Just a reminder for everyone, all of the members' bios are on the committee's webpage at www.ogis.archives.gov and also listed on the handout agenda for today's meeting. We are live streaming this event on YouTube this morning. We were not able to do that the first time, but we are moving into that mode now, and we're also videotaping, and we will be making a transcript. So it will help enormously if you would just remember to identify yourselves when you speak and give your affiliation, and that will help us, that will help the videographers, it will help us when we're doing the minutes. One of our committee members, government members, Dolores Barber of the Department of Homeland Security, could not be here today because of previous commitment. She sends her regrets and looks forward to seeing you at the next meeting on January 27th, 2015. So, let us start with the two members who are on the telephone. I know we've heard you, but we're going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, remind us what you do in your day job, and I'm going to say for everybody, ideally we would love to have you explain more about how you got here and why you're on the committee, but I think your views and your experience are going to come through in our deliberations, so we'll save that. Okay, on the telephone.
Hi, I'm Clay Johnson. I'm the CEO of the Department of Better Technology. We are a company that works on modernizing government through hopefully streamlining the procurement process. I'm a former presidential innovation fellow who worked on the RFP-EC team. Prior to that, I was the director of Sunlight Labs and have been working on government transparency for a very long time.
Thank you, Clay.
This is Dave Barr out here in Eugene, Oregon, and I represent FOIA requesters, public records requesters all around the country as they attempt to get information from federal agencies. And that is, I suppose, my statutory position on this committee is to represent the interests of the requester community. I hope to appear in person one of these times at these meetings, as opposed to by phone, and I look forward to when that might occur. I also want to just pass along that I'm watching the streaming video on YouTube, and there is no audio for that. I'm not sure if that's just a matter of a switch that needs to be flipped, but it's just a silent video image at this point.
Thank you, Dave, and I believe that Krista Lemelin, who is our designated federal officer, whom all of you have been in contact with, has just left the room to go and see if she can rectify that situation.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that's Dave and Clay on the telephone. And if we could, let's start with Mark Zaid, who's all the way to my left, and we'll go around the table. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Miriam. Congratulations on your upcoming retirement. That's what I aspire to. I'm a private practitioner here in DC and also with the James Madison Project and been handling FOIA litigation for over 20 years.
Good morning. My name is Ann Weisman. I'm Chief Counsel for Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. I am, as many of you know, a very frequent FOIA requester. Prior to that, I had many years at the Department of Justice, where, among other things, I did handle the defense of FOIA litigation on behalf of agencies.
I'm Larry Gottesman. With Environmental Protection Agency. I'm the agency's FOIA officer, among other titles.
My name is Andrew Becker. I'm a reporter with the Center for Investigative Reporting, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, and FOIA is just a daily part of my job.
Ramona Branch Oliver, the Director of the Office of Information Services within the Office of the Solicitor at the Department of Labor.
I'm Eric Gillespie. I'm the CEO of a San Francisco-based company called Gavini, and we use data like FOIA data for the private sector.
I'm Melanie Pastay from the Department of Justice. I'm the Director of the Office of Information Policy, and we're responsible for encouraging and overseeing agency compliance with the FOIA.
I'm Lee White, the Executive Director of the National Coalition for History, and obviously FOIA is very important to historians.
Marty.
Hi, I'm Martin Michalowski. I'm with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I'm their FOIA manager.
I'm David Reed. I work for the Federal Communications Commission, where I've spent a great deal of time responding to FOIAs.
Hi, I'm Maggie Mulvihill. I teach data journalism at Boston University, and I'm a working reporter. I'm training the next generation of journalists how to use state and federal FOIA effectively and aggressively. And I'm on the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press steering committee, where I was a law school intern many years ago.
Hi, I'm Ginger McCall. I'm a Freedom of Information Act litigator with the Electronic Privacy Information Center. I also teach a course on the law of open government at Georgetown Law Center.
And my name is Brent Evatt. I'm a career FOIA attorney. I work for the Defense Intelligence Agency Office of the General Counsel.
Nate Jones, National Security Archive, non-government frequent FOIA requester that uses FOIA to get U.S. national security documents declassified and published and analyze them.
Hi, I'm Karen Finnegan. I'm with the State Department, and I manage a division that develops internal policies and procedures for FOIA and handles FOIA litigation and special document production.
I'm Jim Hogan. I do FOIA policy in the Department of Defense Transparency Office within the Directorate for Oversight and Compliance.
Krista, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'm going to introduce the rest of the OGIS staff.
I'm Krista. I'm the designated federal officer for this committee, and I am a facilitator at the National Archives and Records Administration's Office of Government Information Services, and I'm very excited to be sitting with the big boys and girls at the big table. So thank you for letting me be your note taker today.
Thank you, Krista. And if I could just quickly point out other members of the OGIS staff who are really the life support for this committee, not to mention OGIS. Nikki Gramian is there by the door. On the other side, we have Carrie McGuire and Kirsten Mitchell. Robin Ross, is Robin still still helping us with our registration in the hallway? And I would like to introduce our newest staff member, Angel Simmons, who comes to us from the Department of Transportation, and she started yesterday.
Welcome.
So before we dive into our work, I just want to go over a few details about how today's meeting is going to work and cover some basic expectations and ground rules. Okay, I have before we get to the agenda, apparently the audio of the live streaming is not working, so it can't be fixed. Is that correct? Don't know. It's been working on it, working to resolve it, and we'll just keep tabs on that.
The audio is being recorded.
The audio is being recorded, it will be available, but for the live streaming right now, it's not working. Thank you. We'll do our best. I know we will.
Rely on the live tweeters in the room.
So, maybe one of the most important things is we will take a 15-minute break at approximately 11:20. So just keep that in mind. And while no food or drink are allowed in the room, except for the bottles of water that the speakers have, you will be able to grab something from the cafe, which is on the 2 levels down on the basement floor, if you haven't visited there already, and that's also where restrooms are located. Just a reminder, all of the information that the committee members are using today, that used in past meetings, are available on the advisory committee's website, which is within the OGIS webpage at ogis.archives.gov. You can find the committee's charter, biographical information about all the committee members, links to the videos and transcripts, information about meeting dates, and documents related to the work of this committee. We will be meeting up to 4 times a year. The meetings coming up are listed on today's agenda and are also on the webpage. And we have selected Tuesdays of the 3rd week of the month, unless that date conflicted with a holiday. So I think they're pretty consistent. We're going to have a few administrative matters, and then we're going to spend the bulk of our time on the subcommittee reports. We will have 90 minutes. We'll have 30 minutes for each of the subcommittees to report. Remember, we have 3 priority items for which we have 3 subcommittees. One is FOIA oversight and accountability, one on proactive disclosures, and one on FOIA fees. Those subcommittees are free to schedule meetings in addition to these, and in fact, we know that they have already been working and are going to have some reports for us this morning. This is a committee on the Freedom of Information Act, and accordingly, we're wanting our work to be as open and transparent and participatory as possible. We're really glad to see so many people in the room, and we're looking forward to hearing public comments at the end of the meeting. The last 20 minutes are going to be devoted to that. I just want to mention one thing that we talked about at the last meeting. We did explore the creation of a Google group to facilitate communication between the committee members and the public. Ultimately, after a great deal of exploration and work with our Office of General Counsel, as well as GSA, we are not moving forward with that at this time. I think we, like many other FOIA committees, share some concerns about how to do that and comply with the FOIA requirements. The General Services Administration, which is responsible for implementing the Federal Advisory Committee Act, we understand is working to clarify the extent to which social media can be used by agencies in compliance with FOIA, and we look forward to those clarifications, which will help us, and at any time that we are able to move forward with that, we will do so. As I said, we're going to we're looking forward to hearing from you for the non-committee members, and we will have time designated at the end for that. One more time, a little bit of a reminder, we're happy to accept comments at any time. We've had plenty of comments submitted to us, and it's easy to do so by going to our website. There is a tab for Contact Us /submit comments, and we know that people know how to find it, and we encourage you to do that. You can also email us directly. The address is FOIA-advisory-committee@nara.gov.
Aye.
I don't think I hear any noes or nods. So the certified minutes are approved. Thank you. The next item of administrative matters concerns the draft bylaws. The Federal Advisory Committee Act does direct committees to develop operating procedures to govern advisory committee activities and meetings, and to specify the relationship among the advisory committee members, the designated federal officer, and agency staff. We have shared the draft bylaws with the committee and posted the draft on the committee website. Just to note that the bylaws were modeled after the GSA's examples that were posted online, and they reflect the basic intentions for the way the committee will work. They're fairly brief and straightforward. We have had a few suggested changes that are reflected in the version that's posted on the website, but I do think there might be some additional discussion that needs to be had, and I think we are probably not ready today to vote on the bylaws. Could I ask if there might be a few of the committee members who would be willing to sort of pull together any additional suggestions and put forward a version that the committee can then vote on? We can do it by email, we can do it by teleconference, and I think we can dispatch that pretty quickly with a little bit more work. I think we're probably about, as I said, about 98% of the way there. Great. So I've got volunteers: Ginger, David, Melanie, Larry. Great. That's 4 people. Anybody else with a burning desire to work on the bylaws? Okay. Then we're going to put that aside for the moment, and I think we're in pretty good shape on that, and we will look to our working group to finish that up for us. The last thing I'd like to mention in the way of housekeeping is to be sure that everybody has taken a look, the committee members, but also members of the public, our frequently asked questions. We posted those on the committee's website September the 15th. We worked on those, the committee worked on those in conjunction with our Office of General Counsel, NARA's Office of General Counsel, which provides great support to the committee. We attempted to answer a number of questions about meetings and about record keeping that came up at the June meeting and that have come up also through exchanges of email. The core sources for those frequently asked questions and the answers to those questions come from the GSA rules on FOIA, from the Office of Government Ethics opinions, and also from NARA's General Record Schedule 26. I want to emphasize that NARA, particularly because of our mission of providing records management counsel, advice, guidance, and our role in preserving historically valuable documents, we are trying to make sure in every way that we can that the records of this committee are kept in the most efficient and complete way. And that means, as we have requested, and I think everybody is working hard to do this, that we make sure that on our communications we are, that you all are copying Krista, who is our designated federal officer, and that we're keeping a good record so that in the future people will know how we worked and what we did and how we came to the conclusions that we did. Does anybody have any questions or any points they'd like to raise with regard to the FAQs? Let me just add, that is a living document. To the extent that additional questions or issues come up, we can add to those, and we also really hope that those will be a model for other federal advisory committees, because we think they do a pretty good job of addressing a lot of these sort of day-to-day concerns. Okay, wonderful. We're going to then go ahead and move to hearing from each of the subcommittees. We're going to have, as I said, approximately 30 minutes for each subcommittee report, including the status of where the work stands, any discussion or brainstorming that they would like to have with the full committee. And we also want to be sure that we leave here today with a clear path forward for the coming months on the topics at hand as directed upon the creation of this committee and the U.S. Open Government National Action Plan. Just a nudge, if there is anybody on the committee who hasn't begun to participate in the subcommittees, please do so. This is really where our work is going to get done, and we need to have everybody involved in that. So I think as we hear the reports this morning, we're going to have some enthusiastic responses and some additional members for the subcommittees. So I think we are going to start with the Subcommittee on FOIA Accountability and Oversight. Our co-chairs for that are Marty Michalowski and Mark Zaid. And I'm going to turn it over to you gentlemen.
Thank you, Miriam. I guess somebody has to lead the way. I was hoping not to go first. But, and I don't think we'll need 30 minutes, but we do have an ambitious, I think, agenda to look at for the next quarter, and I'd like to share that with the group. First, I want to thank those that have participated in this subcommittee so far. Certainly, it takes people to give their opinions and their thoughts and their experiences and background to really craft an agenda on matters of or opportunities to improve. Thanks to Mark for his leadership and most importantly, the opportunity to host us in our first meeting. Thanks to Ann, Andrew, Ramona, Ginger, Nate for their participation and their input. It was terrific to have a discussion with colleagues in the FOIA community and agency representation too. So what we did is we went into the deliberation and the discussion on what are our objectives, what are our goals, and what are things that we want to work on over the next quarter so that we can start with an area that we can seek on what's been done, what authorities exist, and obviously what are opportunities to improve or model best practices. So after a significant amount of deliberation and discussion, we settled on 4 items that we're going to work on over the next quarter. And each of the members that I just thanked and recognized each have an opportunity and have taken up at least one of these roles to work on and report back in another meeting in December. And then later, of course, report in January. So the first thing that we were going to look at is to identify current authorities for oversight. So what currently exists? This could be, GAO, Inspector Generals, OGIS, DOJ, for example, and what actions have been taken or completed over the last 10 years. So these could be, for example, program reviews, audits, reports, inspections, things that groups that I just mentioned worked on. We're going to look at that for the last 10 years. We will collect it, we will review it, we will analyze it, and there was a suggestion to post this 10-year review for you to see as well, and then for you to look at and review just like we have. One of the purposes for that is to identify some commonalities, or there are gaps, or there's reoccurring issues that are just continuous, or they're inconsistencies. So that's what we're going to be working on for item 1. The second item is to determine opportunities for additional oversight. So I mentioned OGIS and DOJ just as an example. Those exist. We want to look at what is going on with those two groups as well as others, and identify any gaps or opportunities to improve, or opportunities to take additional oversight actions or suggest those actions. The third item that we looked at, or we will be looking at, is to assess the implementation of the FOIA public liaison role and determine opportunities for improvement. This is a little bit maybe outside the typical maybe accountability and oversight role, but this is something that the group felt pretty passionate about, is that public liaison role. Is it what it needs to be? Is there opportunities to streamline that further? Is there opportunities to bolster it, to maybe put in a certain suggested language of who should be in that role to make it successful? That is definitely a role that helps with FOIA processing. It helps with request or an agency communication, negotiation, sometimes dispute resolution. It's a very important role, a very public-facing role. The group felt that we needed to look at that and make sure that it is fulfilling what it was set out and established to do. Lastly, the last time that we want to work on over the next quarter is to evaluate past litigation review efforts and determine if there's further action or improvement needed. This is not something that's really in my wheelhouse, so if there are questions or concerns about litigation review, Mark is taking the lead on that, but that is an area that, again, there's been some work, some successes many years ago in that area, and it's something that we want to look at. Is there an opportunity to improve and bring that back to a certain degree, and what does that look like, and what does that mean? We also looked at one other item and discussed it very vaguely, but we didn't take this up as an actionable item right now over the next 3 months, but that was to identify and look at state, federal, and international oversight and accountability roles. And that's something that we have on hold right now, just because with these 4 items we certainly had enough work, but it is something that is on our agenda for possibly in the future. After, like I said, a very good conversation, a very good discussion on these items, the subcommittee decided to reconvene in early December to take up what actions have been taken, what research has been done, review is conducted, and analysis, and determine where we're at. What do we need to do next, and then ultimately provide a report in our January meeting of the committee. That's what I have to report. Mark, if you have something to add, that would be great. Otherwise, do we want to take input right now? Okay.
I think so.
We're prepared to take questions and input after Mark comments.
Sure, and thank you, Marty, for taking the lead on that. We did try and embrace an ambitious plan that we can contribute, and we intend to provide further written reports as well as we go along, for the hope of obviously having a written product from the advisory committee. From the litigation standpoint, we've got several litigators on the non-governmental side on our subcommittee, so we want to try and streamline what we can and address issues. There was a litigation review back in the early 1990s. I think that was the last one, at least that we know of, so I'm finding out some information about how that was conducted and the success that actually did have in streamlining some of the cases. And we'll look at what we can do to try and minimize litigation. Part of what we're doing with the oversight and accountability is try and strengthen the administrative process so we can cut back on the litigation, obviously. And there have been some changes statutorily to the FOIA in the last few years that have impacted litigation, and we'll take a look at some of those to see how those have operated and if they've worked well or not. And I think with that, if there's any committee members who want to ask questions or offer suggestions, we'd love them.
I'm curious, when you had your discussion of... Oh, sorry.
Identify yourself.
Oh, Maggie Mulvihill from Boston University. When you had the discussion about oversight, the first action item, I'm assuming that you're talking about authorities, governmental agencies. That's what you're speaking about when you say authority, is that correct?
Yes.
Just government. So were there any discussions about what has worked well and what hasn't worked well in terms of oversight within agencies?
One of the examples, so the answer is yes, this is Marty again. I know I personally discussed a little of the things that we've done at our new agency. For example, internal reviews that we've taken on ourselves, aside from an GAO or Inspector General. But it's kind of like self-policing, if you will. So I know that we have talked about that. I offered that up as an example. That's something we are looking at. And then what agencies do across the board. So that's something that we did briefly talk about.
Hi, this is Ann Weisman. I think we saw it in some ways as a two-step process. One was identifying existing oversight authorities. I don't know that it's necessarily confined to the federal government, although that's the sort of obvious starting point. And then I think the next step would be evaluating just how effective they have been. I mean, for example, we're aware that there have been several IG investigations at agencies about their FOIA practices. So, that would be a component that we would look at.
I'll add to that. Thanks, Maggie. I think you actually asked the question. This is Nate Jones from National Security Archive. That we all were, in our committee, were talking about, and I think got the sense that there was a problem. We know that some parts of government encourage compliance, some parts mediate compliance, but there's no one really forcing it. But I think what we came to the conclusion was that we need to do more study before we really take the second step, which I very much hope that our subcommittee does, and figure out actually how to improve oversight and compliance. So I think you're right. The first step is a broad survey of trying to figure out where the holes are and what GAOs, IGs say the holes are, and say that repeatedly with the hopes that we can diagnose the problem more accurately before trying to fix it.
This is Miriam Nisbet. It seems like I'm hearing there are maybe a couple of different aspects. When you're talking about authorities, as everyone has said, you're naturally thinking of government authority to do oversight and review. And those might be more obvious in terms of being able to find them, particularly if you're looking at a time period of the last 10 years. But if you also add into your collection of information reports and reviews that have been done by non-governmental organizations, that seems like that could be quite informative, although I recognize this is a very, very ambitious, just your first item alone is really a huge effort, and it seems like this is, I think it's going to take you a good long time. It'll be interesting to see what you report in January, but I think if you can consider including in your review at some point non-governmental reviews and reports, those might help you identify gaps as well.
Yeah, this is Mark Zaid. Absolutely. we intend to do that. And in fact, I throw out to the committee and even the members of the public, some of us have been doing this for a long time, so we may have some memory of a report here or there. But we'll be searching, mostly online to find GAO reports, congressional hearings, some IG reports. If anyone knows of any audits, inspections, investigative reports from your agencies, other agencies, non-governmental organizations, and can make them known to us, send us, most of us are easily found online email-wise, or can go through the advisory email and send those links to us, or a copy of the report if you have it. That would be absolutely fantastic. One of the things we talked about with a hope would be to make the collection available through the advisory committee website, if that is feasible or not, so that we can have a repository, or depositories? I don't know if it's a repository. Depository? Is it a repository? Because that sounds kind of strange. An archive might be better, yes. An archive of all of these items, because a number of them, especially the IG reports and the GAO reports, they're kind of jumbled in multiple different places. There's no real one place that we know of. And we'll approach that and see what we can do as well. But definitely, if anyone has any knowledge, I know at our first meeting, we were told of a report, and it's in the minutes, that's going to be very helpful from one of the other agencies. So just, shoot it over to us.
This is Miriam. Certainly, if any member, committee member, or any of our public participants today knows of a place where at least some of this is collected, that would be a really helpful piece of information. And I'm thinking that a source for that might be a university program that has perhaps studied this. Or anyway, please speak up so that the committee is not redoing work that's already been done. I know that's, you all know that, but I wanted to say it out loud because this is a really important and ambitious undertaking. And certainly, this is Miriam again, let me just say, we will work with you in terms of making a place where this is available.
This is Maggie again. I just am having a thought about making this a searchable database. It would be a great teaching tool, and I wondered if once you get the collection together, if you'd be able to search it by keyword or by agency. It really would be a unique, I think, very valuable tool both for teaching FOIA but also for litigators. So I would help with that if you need any help.
Thank you.
Maggie, this is Miriam. Perhaps you have a student that might like to volunteer.
Well, I've talked to the Reporters Committee about this, about whether or not there's a way to use media law classes across the country to sort of crowdsource this project or gather information. And it seems like it's an untapped resource that I don't know how such a national media law project at the college level could be organized, but it's probably something worth thinking about. Get those student soldiers out there gathering this so you can do other interesting things. So I don't know what I got myself into with that statement, but it's just something to think about.
Any other thoughts on this first item? The second thing you mentioned was opportunities for additional oversight. And is that, sorry, this is Miriam Nisbet. I'm guessing that that is sort of a, might be an add-on or a byproduct of your first ambition, which is the collection? Yes.
Yeah, this is Mark Zaid, and it's also tied to what Marty said about our later review of state and foreign similarities, or whatever they call their FOIA laws in those various jurisdictions. It's a little bit too ambitious. That might be what some of the students actually could help us with, if any are ever able to participate. But to see what else is out there in other jurisdictions, whether it's state in the United States or overseas, that function in a way that we haven't envisioned or looked at, or maybe can improve on. So there's a lot here, obviously, that we want to try and do. And certainly, I guess, again, I can throw that out to the public if anybody knows of how, I don't do state litigation, but I'm sure there are some here who do a lot of state litigation, and some of the states have a very aggressive FOIA practice through the state jurisdictions that are actually disclosing more information than the federal government. So there's a lot to learn there.
Larry.
Yes, Larry Gottesman. I just have one comment or suggestion. When we start looking at or comparing states and cities to the federal government, we need to understand states and cities are not the federal government. We need to compare apples to apples versus an organization that basically maybe get 100 requests or 200 requests a year versus a government that may get 600,000 requests a year. So we just need to make sure we're sort of at least addressing those discrepancies or those differences.
This is Ann. I don't disagree, but for purposes of oversight and accountability, I'm not sure those differences are that critical. So, and I also want to say, we had some discussion in our meeting where the goal is to really produce some concrete things, not just to have recommendations. I mean, we are very ambitious, and we'll see if we can meet this, but we are very committed to seeing some very concrete things come out of this. I mean, the collection is a start, but that's only a first step, and I think we see ourselves going far beyond that in terms of identifying where the gaps are in oversight and accountability and coming up with solutions, and if there's a way to start implementing those solutions, we're really committed to that process.
Yeah,
I'll second that. Nate Jones.
This is Marty again. I mean, that's exactly what Ann said, is that's our stepping stone to start with. And we wanted to see over 10 years what has been done, what's been transformed, what works, what hasn't been tapped or addressed, and really look at that to see, again, what's working, what isn't, what has been an ongoing issue for 10 straight years. And we need to craft a different way or offer a suggestion on how do we address that, because in 10 years, for example, I'm just making this up because I haven't looked at the review, but there may be possibilities where something has not been addressed effectively and instrumented true change in 10 years. So maybe that's something that we need to look at a little bit more closely, because that may be more serious than something that just popped up last year or came out on an annual FOIA report.
Could we, I have a couple of questions. This is Miriam on your number 3 and number 4 objectives. If we could move to those. Could you talk a little bit, either Mark or Marty, about how you were looking at connecting with and assessing the FOIA public liaison role, which is, as you said, very significant and a great source of information for the committee.
I can certainly address it, because I'm sure number 4, I'm not going to address that. That's something for Mark, definitely. But the public liaison role, there was a significant discussion over that, probably the most, I think, out of all these items. Because, again, it was something that we all felt was a very important role. I think we all shared stories on our experiences, both good and bad or mediocre, with this role, and even to a degree how it's been handled in our agencies or in our previous kind of places of employment. And one of the things that we looked at was we would like to reach out and survey the current public liaisons or poll them. And that's something that has yet to be determined if we're able to do that, and how do we exactly do that, where we can see what is the makeup of that position, what is the type of employee, the type of position that's associated with that role in agencies, what opportunities have been successful, what is maybe a sticking point of possible at issue, things along those lines. And in order to really do that is to really evaluate the people that are currently serving in that role or have served in that role in the past. Again, one of the things that you're going to see probably a repetition of is really, we felt that in order to really be effective, we need to know what's going on and what has gone on in the past. Because we're looking at something maybe that's going on today, but maybe a few years ago was slightly different. And maybe we made successful improvements there, or maybe we backslid a little bit and it needs to be readdressed again. But one of the first steps is to go out and survey that role in each agency, bring that data back, and then in conjunction with that is really starting to look at that. Is there opportunities to, again, improve it, change it possibly, look at what the original onset was for that role in agencies, and what the purpose was, and through that survey again, or the poll, whatever you want to call that, or is that role really being lived up to? So, looking at what was done many years ago, whenever that was put into place, and then today, are we actually implementing that? So some of that was some of the discussion that we're looking at.
Yep. This is Mark Zaid, and part of that related to what some of us discussed in the first meeting, which was when, July? June. And that was attitude. What are the attitudes of those within the federal government who are working in the FOIA positions? And those who are in the FOIA liaisons, and we haven't judged any agency or any one, but those in that position who are involved with the public, probably more so than anyone else, at least as it's designed. One would hope that they're going to have a very, very positive attitude for the FOIA, as well as a very helpful attitude. And we want to make sure that that has worked. I mean, without naming agencies, there are some agencies that I know I can call and never get a phone call back from. Now, something's wrong there, because that's not how it's supposed to be designed. That's not what this position was designed for. Others, we had some conversations of that the person who was put in that position didn't have really any FOIA experience at all. It was just someone that was available to take the slot. And if that's the case, well, what kind of education might be given to that individual? Because it'd be better to have somebody, obviously, that was more experienced and maybe came out of the FOIA community, whether government or non-government. But I know we had some conversations, and we can talk to the General Counsel's office about what it is we are allowed to do with respect to contacting agencies, because we honestly did not know about that. Some of the government representatives on our subcommittee raised some concerns, not on their own, but identified that there was a possible impediment to doing so. It wasn't necessarily because of the advisory committee status, but something about polling or surveying. I forget which word we weren't supposed to use.
Right.
One of those we're not supposed to use, apparently.
Paperwork Reduction Act.
Right.
Yeah.
Paperwork Reduction Act has input. There's
requirements.
So we weren't familiar with it, so we needed to
But Mark,
check.
we can work through that, I think, pretty quickly because, in fact, I think there have already been, our Office of General Counsel has already been looking into that and to see what we can do and how we can do it. And so I'm certain that we can remove the impediments and do it in a perfectly correct way.
One thing, this is Melanie Pastay. One thing that I can certainly offer to the subcommittee is we could certainly convene a meeting of FOIA public liaisons and have it be, and to give you an opportunity to sort of sit in a room with a group of FOIA public liaisons, and just as part of your research and your gathering of info, that's something that we're happy to do.
That would be great.
Thanks, Melanie.
Sure.
This is Ramona Oliver from the Department of Labor. I'd just like to add one more thing. As a part of our deliberations on this topic of the FOIA public liaison, we really realized that it's the culture within the agency. Does this chief FOIA officer hold a position of authority? And then how linked in are they with the chief FOIA officer who sets the tone across the agency for how FOIA is implemented? And so from my own perspective, we are 23 freestanding agency components across. And then down, there are national, regional, and district offices that have to report up to through this chain. So we also wanted to look at the service of customer service centers, which are also a part of this outreach process. They are supposed to be the first line of contact in helping to address concerns by requesters, and oftentimes the chief FOIA officer or the FOIA public liaison is only as good as the support staff working in the offices where the requests are coming and where the records are maintained. So we just wanted to take a holistic view of this process because that's going to give some indicator on how successful the FOIA public liaison will be within individual agencies.
That's a very good point. And I would just add in terms of contact with and convening, OJA certainly would be part of that. The FOIA public liaisons are our primary, our main, I'm not going to say our only, but our first point of contact when we are contacting agencies about a request, a matter that has come to OJIS because there is a dispute or a potential dispute. So that's a population that we have a lot of a great familiarity and with and appreciation for. We're going to need to wrap up fairly soon, and I don't want to do that without hearing a little bit about your fourth point, which is the litigation review. Could you talk a little bit about that, Mark?
Sure. So that predominantly arose out of the Reno order that came out in 1993 that initiated a litigation review that went across the United States of all the active FOIA litigation at the time. And Melanie, you maybe have to say, we weren't clear as to whether it was Federal Programs Branch or Civil Division or the U.S. Attorney's offices themselves who did the review. That was unclear. I don't know if you know.
I'm trying to remember. I think it was Federal Programs Branch that did it.
So,
And maybe both. I'm sorry, maybe it's both.
And that's, I know we checked one of the FOIA newsletters to see, the FOIA update to see if there was a little bit of information from probably around 1993, 1994. And I want to say there was like 400 lawsuits or something like that, and there was a review, and quite a number of lawsuits were either dismissed after this review, or in fact, I was even told there were some lawsuits that had been completed that actually additional information was released as a result of the review. The similar holder memo didn't have any specific requirement to do this review. So that was one of the things we were going to look at to see if there was a way to have some sort of review. Was it needed? Can it be done? Is it worthwhile to have it? How would it be done? And then just because, again, we have several litigators who are on our subcommittee, what can best be done to, frankly, minimize the litigation. Or I know from my perspective, I honestly don't pay that much attention to the administrative process because it just doesn't work sufficient to my client's needs, so I jump into litigation. Is there a way to possibly...
Although I know you're going to start coming to OGIS.
I do. You know I do come to OGIS. We do. We do send to OGIS, and OGIS has been fantastic. We want to still give you more teeth. That's what we're going to work on. If Albania has teeth in their OGIS, then the U.S. government's OGIS should have teeth too.
And Mexico.
And Mexico, which will be one of the things we will be looking at as part of this oversight. But, you know, what can be done? There is, as litigators from the government side and the nonprofit and the non-governmental side, once we enter into litigation, it becomes a free-for-all battle amongst each other. And what seems to be lost is this evaluation of, from the government side, because we want the records released, so we're willing to go, yes, if you want to give us something, we'll obviously go away. But we get into a major battle, and most litigation's handled, correct me if I'm wrong, Melanie, the U.S. Attorney's Office, I would say, handle most of the FOIA litigation around the United States, correct? And so there might not be as much a coordinated discussion. That's what the Federal Programs Branch Office is typically dealing with, because they'll take on a case that is going to have impact from a policy perspective. But once we get into this litigation, then we're in a battle. And then it's basically, you know, best man, best woman wins, and who's standing at the end of the day. Well, we'd love to see if there's some way to have some additional review of what this litigation is going to be about to decide, do we really want to be here from either side? Is this something we really need to be fighting against? Can we narrow this battle going in and obviously save taxpayers' money, save resources, time, et cetera, and promote what at least I know some of us believe, you know, the joint objective of FOIA. We shouldn't have any different opinion whether we're in the government or not in the government. We are all fighting for additional openness. And the question is just which angle we're taking when we're fighting. So that's what the litigation review is sort of going to be. We'll have some suggestions that we'll make to see if they could be implemented. We're going to be talking to folks that were in the government at different times, in the government now, get their opinions as well, and hopefully come up with some streamlining. I think is probably the best thing we can do.
Could I make sure that everybody remembers, for those of you who are working on this particular point, there was a very lengthy report that was done by Professor Mark Grunwald for the Administrative Conference of the United States. It is in our documents. David Pritzker, who is here from ACUS, introduced it into the record at our meeting in June, and it is a very helpful look at FOIA litigation, and if in addition to the findings, I think the methodology would prove to be very interesting to you as well. So that's one resource that's a pretty recent resource too.
Absolutely, yep. It's top on the list.
Any other comments on this subcommittee's work so far? This is really exciting. I hope you have a lot of energy. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other comments, I think we are ready to take a break. Now, before you jump up, we're going to take 15 minutes. So, all right, realistically, please be back in this room a little before 11:30. We'll take slightly more than that. The cafe and restrooms are 2 floors down. You can take the stairs. They're 2 separate sets of stairwells, or the elevator. You'll be going to B for basement. And we'll see you back here a few minutes before 11:20, and then we'll start sharp.
11:20.
Thank you. 11:30. Good morning.